Hello, my friends. I'm so glad that you came back to catch the end of my conversation here with Becky Niemeyer. And we've been chatting through what she has dubbed the extraordinary no, the extraordinary yes, and now the extraordinary open-handed invitation of her life. So thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Stacey Holmes, and this is Glordinary, a few moments where we celebrate God's glory and champion the ordinary. I'm glad you're here. All right, well, let's refresh. So you just brought us up to speed on your miraculous pregnancy of not one, but 4 babies. All right, overachiever. So why don't you tell us who those 4 babies represent?
All right. So we have Jenna. She's our oldest. Yep. And then almost 4 years to the day later, we have Hannah, Lauren, Tanner, and Tyler. 2 girls, 2 boys. So now they're 12 and Jenna's 16. And it's been quite a few years. They're all doing great. They're amazing kids.
You're doing a good job, Mama. Mm-hmm. You had just told us about how present God truly was in those early days, especially even when you weren't quite on board with his extraordinary yes, which I love. I love the honesty of that too. I think that's really important to just be that honest and raw with people. It's really authentic. But out of all those extraordinary no's and even the yeses, that really paved the way for this next part of your story, which is what you call the extraordinary open-handed invitation.
Yeah. So it was a few years ago now, and probably about 2021, I want to say. And it started, it was a little different because Andy and I, instead of like circumstances happening to us, infertility, that was out of our control. Having quadruplets, again, like way out of our control. That was 100% God. This one was one where there was a scenario where we sought God out in something that at first I wasn't planning on seeking him out, but we sought him out very intentionally, and he kind of walked us down this curvy, windy path. And it was just really cool to see his fingerprints and him at work when you're just totally like in your ordinary everyday, just trying to live extraordinarily one step at a time, just for him every day.
Yeah. And I even love the visual that you just gave there of this like curvy, windy road. It reminds me of when we were doing our Psalm 23 series and we were talking about he leads me in paths of righteousness. Yeah. And it was literally in the Hebrew, that means the circles of righteousness, these like spirals as you're spiraling up the mountain, because that's actually the most gentle way instead of going straight up. But it doesn't always feel gentle in the moment. But I love how you describe that. Like it wasn't just a point A to point B. Like, oh, we had infertility. This took us from here to here. But this story that you're about to share was a lot more windy. It did have a lot more twists and turns, and maybe some of them were less dramatic than, well, a lot is going to be less dramatic than, I think you peaked. Like quadruplets is kind of like the peak on the drama scale. But there really were a lot of twists and turns in that very ordinary and common pursuit of, God, what do you want us to do here?
Yeah. So Andy was in a place where he wasn't very happy with work and just kind of at a place where, I don't know what to do.
Just kind of restless.
And Andy he was just frustrated. And this is such an Andy thing. If you guys know my husband, he was like, I just want to move to South America, which is always his go-to. Like he would love to live there.
I get it.
Today.
Yeah.
And
I mean, not South America, but I get mine's Montana.
Okay.
Like, I'm just going to go to Montana.
Montana, South America, just about the same thing. So I was going out for lunch with a friend, and I remember I was kind of complaining. I was kind of belly aching, like, she was asking how he's doing, and I said, he's frustrated. He wants to move to South America. Just kind of
flee the country.
Yeah, flippantly just kind of saying it.
Right.
And she just kind of looked at me. What if you gave him the dignity of just considering it instead of just flippantly just setting it aside? What if you just considered it and prayed about it for a month and asked God instead of just tossing it aside as just this like crazy idea? And I was like, don't like that.
Right. That's kind of a stretch. That's one of those like wounds from a friend can be trusted, even though she's not trying to wound you. But like, are you stable enough that I can speak truth to you right now?
But it really was one of those things, like after she said it, then I kind of was mulling it over in my head and I thought, okay, all right, God, you're big enough. all right,
Yeah.
I will go to you with this, and let's see what happens.
Yeah. So what
Right.
were some of those initial conversations
Right.
with the Lord like?
So at first it was just, God, will you open up my heart to even open for something like this?
Right. Sure.
But then what God did is, in the process of that, and it ultimately, it was the starter conversation of just like one small step at a time of us just trusting God, open-handed posture, open-hearted posture, chin up, looking with our eyes to God, saying, okay, God, what's the next step? Because what started out as just that initial question of like, are we going to move to South America? Well, that seems really drastic, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
But at the same time, it did open up just Andy and I's relationship. I invited him to just be a part of this prayer too. So he grew a lot closer to Christ, and we grew a lot closer together as we were just kind of considering what this looks like. We would just take one just incremental step at a time.
Yeah.
And it would just be even something as simple as, are we going to continue possibly looking into, we have friends that were missionaries in Peru. So are we going to
Okay. So
possibly
that's
look
the
into,
South America.
yeah. Are we going to
connection.
possibly like look into that more, or are we going to not? Okay. So we are going to look that way. And so it was just like one little step at a time.
Yeah.
How opportunities would either show up or opportunities would go away. And it just led us through this kind of winding path. And every step of the way, just this open-handed invitation, something like that also really makes you realize how selfish you are. Because I mean, the
Ooh,
idea of, you can talk about it, but when you actually think about, oh, but we'd have to sell our place. Oh, but the kids would have to
Yeah.
move to a totally different country.
Yeah.
We would have to be away from our family, like all
Yeah.
those logistical pieces.
Right.
That's when it gets really scary.
Yeah.
So that's where we would just take one tiny step at a time. We
Right.
had just a couple of friends that we had shared this with. I think I shared it
Yeah.
with you and Carrie, and
Yep.
just having people kind of pray us through it. And
Right.
I would say I was reluctantly taking one step at a time. I was not knocking down any doors.
Right. Yeah.
I was, okay, God, if I'm going to hold my hands open, and we just really took tiny baby steps at a
Yeah.
time. And it led us kind of to a winding path every step of the way, saying, okay, God, we're just going to take a tiny little step.
Yeah.
Open up my heart, because there was so many things in my heart that I was struggling with these steps. That's why it was tiny little steps, because every step of the way I felt like I was having fights with myself. Like, oh gosh, I don't want to sell our place. I
Yeah.
love
You're
it.
kind of like
And
laying things
yeah,
down
yeah.
all along the
So
line.
just
Yeah.
working through tiny little things, and every layer, it was like a doctor with a like open heart surgery, like the scalpel, like just tiny little things. I felt like God was just
Sure.
slowly loosening things in my heart of, do you trust me? Do you trust me? Do you trust me? Every step of the way. And so we kind of like curved around, and then we got to this point where we were like, okay, is this the next step? And then very quietly and assuredly, the door shut.
Yeah.
And nothing happened with that.
Right.
It just kind of closed, and it left both of us like, it was like a almost 2-year process, like a good solid year and a half process of
Yes,
us
that
just
is
taking
long.
one little step at a time, and open hand, and okay, God, we're following your lead, and
Yeah.
me working through all these things in my own brain. And then we got there, and it went away, and it left us kind of going, what was that?
Right. Yeah. What was all
was that
that
all
just
about, God?
Well, exactly. Yeah. You kind of get to the end of this conversation, so
Yeah.
to speak. Like, are we moving to South America? Are we
Right,
doing missions? Are we not? And now what? Right? Because I
Right.
mean, like, you've just kind of been through this huge stretching process and kind of like a purging in a
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
Did you ever kind of wonder, like, Lord, what was that all about? Like, was that necessary? Like, what are you up to, dude?
Yeah, it definitely felt like, okay, God was sanctifying us, but I didn't know what for, and I didn't know what he was like testing us for lack of a better word. But it felt very much like he had us go through that for a reason. And just the trust that I built up, and that Andy and I had built up to that point, we knew that we could trust him. And and I just love to ask God the why. I will forever always ask, okay, but why, God? But he always reminds me, you don't need to know, Becky.
Yeah.
Which is probably very helpful. But 7 months later, then we kind of had a door open up again. And so that was, I think, to me, it connected the dot of, oh, okay, that's where you were going
Right.
with this, God.
Right. And it was another door that was, whew, I am really going to need to trust you and to step out in this and to lay some things down. Yeah. So do you want to share what that looks like for your family?
Sure. So what that was, again, we're at this point, this is like 2 years after. So the quads are about 11, 10, 11. Jenna's still a young teenager. And again, things were going pretty good in our family. And we had this wacky thing that he was having us go through, and it didn't really amount to anything, and so we were kind of getting back to equilibrium.
Right. Well, and you took your kids through that journey too.
Right.
So that's a lot of things to manage there, and manage in their young faith too.
So and then in the fall, all of a sudden, just a lot of opportunities kind of came together, and this foster adoptive care thing kind of started in my sphere of just life. And I remember thinking at first, well, I am certainly not going to be considering adoption or, foster care. I mean, we considered it years and years ago.
Right.
That door had shut.
Right.
That's not on our radar. But hey, I'm an OT, and I know a lot about trauma, and I know a lot about like different ways that you can work with kids. And so I thought that's how I would be a support in this kind of ministry, and never really thinking anything beyond that.
Right. And of course your house is feeling like, hey, we got plenty of room.
Right.
Like we got nobody here.
No.
Right. But initially you were thinking like, okay, I can definitely play a supportive role. In like they were kicking off a new ministry at our church, and you're thinking, okay, I can step into that, and then just took a little detour.
Yeah. So then there was just a situation where there was a girl that came on our radar, and she needed to be adopted, and she didn't have a home or a family, and we were praying about it, and it was just, again, one of those things. God had God not put Andy and I through what he did before, I think we would have taken many years to go through this process, but he had put us through that for his very specific purpose and reason. So when we had this opportunity with this girl come up again, we knew right then and there that this was definitely God at work. And so we were just, again, one small step at a time, open hands. Okay, God, what would you want for our family? And God worked in Andy's heart, not my heart. It was actually Andy's heart that he had moved in this one. And that's just right there.
You guys kind of flipped roles.
We did.
Yeah.
We did.
While you were less open to the South America idea, he was way less open to the initially to the foster or adoption route.
Right.
Yeah.
And then God really kind of changed his heart.
Yeah.
Like God had changed my heart for the South, we went to South America.
Yeah,
ministry,
which was really beautiful to see too, because like probably a lot of you are not going to know Beck's husband. I mean, he is all man's man. Like you don't get more.
And you can't talk him into anything either.
No,
that's
he's
the
stubborn.
Thing. He's so stubborn. So like even when this came up, I was like, I'm not going to talk. I remember like with this girl, like that's not even on my radar. And I remember he was like, he even said, he's like, well, we're not going to adopt her. And I laughed. I'm like, of course we're not going to adopt her. That's not on my radar. I'm not going to talk you into anything like that. Like God worked in his heart. God was really walking us to accept her into our family.
Yeah.
So we did, but true to God nature, he twists and turns.
Yeah. There were some winding roads with that and more growth.
Yeah. We were intending to adopt her. And so she lived with us for a couple months, but then it kind of became evident that it wasn't good for the family. And so
it was meant to be more of a transitional time and something that you thought would be permanent.
Yeah.
There were some changes there.
So that was a lesson too, that when I think God is doing something, you can be obedient, and God wants us to be obedient. That open-handed posture and just trusting him, and he can be trusted. He can so be trusted.
Yeah.
But we can't tell God where he's going. You know what I mean? Like I can't predict him. And just when I think I I know where God's going, he's always reminding me like, oh no, sweetie, I'm not going there. So she did not end up working in our family. And it was devastating, honestly. It was very sad for me. It was very hard for our family to have this like broken, we thought we were going to be adopting, and then it did not work out.
Right.
So it was very devastating for us, but at the same time, we knew God was still in it, even though it hurt, even though it was so hard.
Yeah.
He was still there. It hurt.
Well, and I think those circumstances, which again, details are going to be different from person to person, but what makes things challenging is when we think something is going to be long-term, or even if it's a friendship that fizzles out, a relationship of some sorts. When you think, hey, I have found my lifelong, this is my ride or die. And then there's just some shifts and changes in life, and you just never could have foreseen something looking different. I think everybody can relate to that. And that is so difficult to walk through. And yet, what were kind of like the ways that you felt like you were leaning into Christ during that time when things felt like it was just like a drastic curveball?
Well, we didn't even talk about this with the other ones, but it reminded me of when I had a miscarriage, because I had a miscarriage in between Jenna and the babies. And it was just this devastating, like joy, happiness, hope, and then not. Yeah. And so I worked through this loss the very, very similar fashion, like just depending on God's word, but also going to him really honestly, just like, I don't understand, God.
Right.
Just almost having just like these crying, angry conversations with him at times. Like, what was that? And exactly. I thought this and now this. And so it was really hard. It reminded me a lot of that, of when I was recovering, when I went through the miscarriage, like what I was emotionally,
the loss,
working through in the loss, but still knowing he's there, still trusting that he is ultimately, like, his ways are not our ways. He's going to do things that we would never do, but it's because he's God. Like we are not.
Yeah.
And I'm in awe. I've been walking with him for like 25 years, and I'm in awe how much I think that I'm fully dependent on him. And then I realize, like, oh wait, no, I put myself back in the driver's seat. I put myself back in control again. Why do I do that? Why do we do that? But it's when you just remember over and over that, okay, God, I'm going to submit to you. I don't get it. I don't know what you're doing, but I'm still going to trust that you are good because your word says you're good, and you've proven you're good by all the history of all you've done for me.
Right.
All the stories in the Bible, what I see in my friends, what I see in all you do, like there's so much more than sufficient evidence that he is there. He is at work. So just believing that and trusting that even when you don't feel it at the time.
Well, and what I loved that you just said there, and I think this is true of what you've been sharing all night here, is that you have history with the Lord. Mm-hmm. There has been this relationship that the two of you have with one another, and you have found him to be steadfast. You have found him to be reliable, and you have found him to be big enough when you need to hurl your accusations, when you need to hurl your anger, when you need to, express your joy and your gratitude and be raw, honest, and say, this feels more like a curse than a blessing. When you can just ask and say those really hard things, like, I thought you wanted us to obey and go this direction. Right. And this has not only felt like it's caused harm to me, but I see effects of it in my kids too. And we need to have a conversation here about this, Lord. But I mean, I love how you're talking about you have this history with him. And there are times that you don't understand what's going on, but you're banking on history. Yeah. And that is beautiful. And it reminds me of the story of when the Israelites first went across the Jordan River. And what does he ask them to do? Take a rock out of the middle of the river. I want you to take a rock. And then you're going to build this monument. You're going to build this pillar that you can look back on. And whenever your kids see it, not just you, but your kids too, see it, you're going to be able to look to that and say, oh, no. You see, this is when we were able to get across that river. Yeah. And that's what you're doing. That's what your history here is with your extraordinary no, your extraordinary yes, and your extraordinary open-handed invitation. And the story isn't over. No. I mean, there was hard things. It took definite twists and turns, curveballs, side streets, all of the above. Times it felt like there were dead ends. Yeah. But yet it was just really a comma on this story, and the story continues. Yeah.
And the story will continue even after this. But a couple months after that failed adoption and just the heartache with that, then we had another invitation. And then there was a foster girl that needed a placement. And I'll be honest, my heart was like, I'm done.
Been there, done that.
This time I'm going to say no.
Yeah.
But God doesn't. I love how he just will just gently nudge your heart.
Right.
Especially when you're just tired or just not wanting to go there again. He'll just gently nudge you. And so he did. And Andy and I prayed about it. And we felt like God was inviting us to say yes. So where it stands right now, and that brings us to where we are now today, is that we've had just the most awesome 15-year-old girl living with us for the past 9 months or so. She's just been just a breath of fresh air in our family. And certainly like there's ups and downs because there's life, right?
Right.
Like, it's not all rainbows and sunshine.
Right.
Please don't think my life is like that.
There's going to be ups and downs. Like
so many ups and downs.
Yeah.
But it's just also really cool to see how God is very intentionally like put her in our life, put us in her life, how he's at work in so many more ways and factors than we could have ever manufactured on our own.
Right. Exactly.
And it all is because we've just like one step at a time, every day, day in, day out, we're choosing to say, okay, God, I trust you. I'm going to take that small step. And
a Glordinary step.
Glordinary step.
But you are glimpsing his glory in the ordinary of your life. I mean, that it just is so evident in your story. And obviously we know your family well. We see you every week, but I can attest to that. Like, you are glimpsing his glory in the ordinary. You have this history with him, history with a shepherd, history with a savior, history with a Lord that is leading you and guiding you in the ups and downs and the twists and turns. And he's faithfully showing up and showing up in big ways. He's always working for your good, always listening. He's worth being trusted, and you're worth being led. That depth, that relationship that you share, I think that is what honestly is truly extraordinary in your very ordinary but very glordinary life as well. So I want to thank you for listening and welcoming our first of many Glordinary guests. I have lots of note cards, lots of index cards with names on it. So I will be back though in your ears on Wednesday, just you and me. So until then, Becky,
remember, you're not alone in this. I'm praying for you, friend. Have a glordinary day.